We are Duck Hunting Fanatics, knee deep in the duck blind. If it flies, it dies. Only Duck Hunting Fanatics know what it feels like to see a brightly colored drake mallard cup its wings and soar towards your decoys. It's what we do, and it's what we love. Duck Hunting Fanatics, with boots on the ground, eyes in the skies reports. And we get it from professional duck guides all across the country. We interview them for their top tips and tricks from their years of experience from the duck hunting blind. This is Duck Hunting Fanatics, and this is Eric Wilkes.
Greetings, friends and fellow duck hunting fanatics. Eric Wilkes here with another episode of Knee Deep in the Duck Blind. And today we have Joey Vassallo with us from Midwest Flyways. Welcome to the show, Joey. Thanks for being here, man. Appreciate you.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me.
Well, cool, man. So this is the Duck Hunting Fanatics podcast. So I want to welcome you and thank you again for your time for being here, and thank our fans for tuning in here just a second. Just talk a little bit about, I know we talked a little before we hit the record button, as I always do. And you've grown up shooting widgeons, and you've grown up shooting a bunch of different ducks. What's your favorite one and why?
Growing up, like I grew up shooting like all puddler ducks and then a couple of canvasbacks and bluebills here and there and a lot of geese. And, when we made our logo, I just looked at everyone else's stuff and everyone just had a plain old mallard sitting there. And I was like, you know what? Widgeon just cup up into your spread so hard, and they are a lot harder to hit than a mallard. And they are just drop dead gorgeous ducks. We should make our logo into a widgeon. And so that's what we did. But, when I was younger, it's probably my favorite duck to shoot. And now, I got to say, I'm starting to turn into a little bit of a mallard purist, and mallards are the best thing that respond to the call. And that's my favorite thing to do. I could really care less if I shoot the gun anymore. I just love making birds do what they don't want to do, what they wouldn't normally do unless there was a hunter there,
Right. No, yeah.
So probably mallards.
Yeah. Now, you grew up hunting, and some of our listeners haven't, right? They're fairly new to it. It seems like we get a lot of new guys that are just getting exposed to the sport, and just really getting into it over the last 2, 3, 4 years even. What's your favorite time of year to hunt? And then what strategy or what unique strategies would you say, because I know you do a lot of it, what unique strategies would you apply during that time? And how would you advise these guys that are just kind of getting into the sport?
For everyone that doesn't know, we're out of Minnesota. And so we're one of the first hunting seasons, and we close the quickest. So duck hunting closes Thanksgiving weekend, which is just terrible because most of our ducks get here second week of December. So it really hurts. So probably my favorite time to hunt, just because I'm from Minnesota and some of the craziest stuff happens, is November, because you'll get some years 2 feet of snow, and you'll get mallards that have no idea where they need to go, or same thing with geese. And then some years you won't have snow until January. And so that makes the hunting really tough, but it's sometimes that water stays open all year long to where you can hunt them on water, and people are overhitting the fields. And so if you just switch over to a water hole, you're going to smack them up. Probably my favorite way to hunt that time of year is finding a transition pond. So I hate waking up early, man. I hate it. Like there's only two things. Yeah. The only thing that I will wake up at 3 a.m. for is duck and goose hunting. But if I don't have to, I'm not going to. You know what I mean? And so I will look, because especially if it's public land, you're racing 10 to 15 people to beat them there. And sometimes you need to get there at 3 a.m. And I'm just too old for that now. And I just don't care. And so if I can find where they are leaving the roost and finding a social pond, a transition pond is what we call it, before they go out and feed, and after they're done feeding, they come back and then they head back to the roost, I will hit that spot all day. It is the most comfortable, lackadaisical hunting. It is like the funnest hunting you can ever experience, just because it's so laid back. You really don't even need a blind, absolutely be hidden, but you don't need your face painted. You don't need to be completely covered up in the cattails. One of my favorite transition ponds, there's no blind, there's no hide. I'm crouching behind the dog blind, a Momarsh dog blind, and I'm waiting for ones and twos to come back to water. And it is just the most disgusting hunting. That's like the purest form of mallard hunting in my mind. So
yeah, that sounds awesome. Sounds like a lot of fun. I've actually never hunted, that way. We've always done some pond jumping, but we've never actually sat on or and a lot of it comes down to time and preseason scouting, and depending on your area and what you're local to and what you have access to and so on and so forth. But that sounds very interesting. And I like you, I'm down here in South Central Wisconsin, so it always opens early and closes early, and then you got to move south. And but one thing I will say about the Mississippi Flyway is we get first crack at them. So you get through the older birds that are a little wiser and smarter, and then you get to some of the newer, younger birds that are learning, so they're not as spooked and they don't spook as easily. So it's a little bit easier, I think, up in the northern states to sort of talk to the birds and get them to fly in and do what you want them to do. And I know, you're a partner at Midwest Flyways. Let's talk about that for a second. What is, just tell us about Midwest Flyways, why you started it, what you guys are all about too, because I want our listeners to just, understand that not only are you a duck hunter, but you have a lot of value to offer to the marketplace as well.
Well, thank you. I don't think everyone would say that, but I appreciate you saying that. And no, we started Midwest Flyways 6 years ago. And we always called it our why, like, why are we doing this? And it's to further the newer generation. It's to usher the newer generation and to keep those traditions going on. Just because there is something, and I'm sure you can relate, there is something so special about watching the world wake up.
Yep.
And just one duck cupping up 20 feet away from you and you pulling up one shot, your dog goes out and gets it. It is like one of the most magical feelings in the world. And so I want more people to do it, because I'm sure the duck hunting numbers keep going down of people who buy their federal duck stamp. And so it means less and less people are going out. And so we were thinking, it's such a hard sport to get into. One of my best friends, I've known him since I was 5, Cal, one of the other owners of Midwest Flyways. I took him out when he was 20. So that was almost 10 years ago now. And he had never been duck hunting before. And I took him out and he was just blown away, and he had 1,000 questions for me. Whereas I grew up doing it with my dad since I was 1.5 years old. So it's just subconscious for me as to how to do it and when to do it, all that jazz. And when my friend Cal, who's a very smart guy and catches on pretty quick, had all these questions for me, I was just like, huh. And then he continued to duck hunt with me a couple of years. And then he goes, dude, we should start a company. We should teach other people how to do this, because you're a good teacher. This is so much fun, and no one does it. None of our friends do it, And so that's what made us start Midwest Flyways. And then I've always been okay on a duck call. And then when we started this, I was like, well, if we're going to teach people how to duck hunt, I better become a really good duck caller. And then I've always been a pretty decent goose caller. And then I bought a short reed right after we started Midwest Flyways, and I practiced for 1.5 hours a day for about 1.5 years. And then I felt proficient enough to teach people. And apparently we've helped a lot of people become a lot better at duck and goose calling. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that is really cool. And I know you're pretty active on Instagram, but you guys got some YouTube content out there too. And I guess what I got up on the screen here for those of you guys that are watching. And there's a lot of value that you guys provide out to the new hunter. And that's really part of the reason why we started Duck Hunting Fanatics too, right? Is just, keeping the dream alive and keeping the sport alive, and introducing people to the live action of duck hunting and all its glory and everything that it offers. And I know you guys are pretty active on Instagram too, Instagram.com, Midwest Flyways. Got about 20,000 followers right now. So again, you see their logo. You see it right here on their homepage too. So, give these guys a look. And I know you're going to learn something. I know you're going to enjoy it. I know that you guys are gonna, again, find value in it, and that's part of why we, asked Joey to be on the call here with us today. So, Joey, for public land hunters,
Yeah.
I know you mentioned the get there at 3 a.m. I know that's the race for a lot of us, especially where I am too. It's all largely, there's very little access to public land here. There's a ton of hunters. You got to get out there at 3 a.m. What advice would you give to someone that's hunting in those competitive areas? And then I'm gonna kind of layer on top of what you say. But what advice would you give someone that's in a really competitive area?
Scout. And it's so annoying when people say that, but it's so important because
Yep.
Scouting is how I started to kill a lot more birds. When I was growing up, my dad had some private land and he had a lot of farmer friends, and we would go out to the same 6 spots, and we'd have really good days and we'd have really bad days. And now that I started scouting a lot more, like once I stopped hunting with my dad as much, and I started hunting with my friends and a lot by myself, scouting makes a huge difference. I mean, night and day. So let's say you're going to the river, right, in Wisconsin. You're going to the river, bunch of pressure there. You need to find the backwater holes that no one else can get to. And you need to look at those spots without spooking out birds, because a lot of people are going to set up on like the larger areas that are very easy to get to, but you need to figure out exactly where those birds are going at what time and why they're going there. Because once you know those things, you're going to be more successful. The more that you know about your prey, the better you're going to do. And so if you're like me now, where you don't want to do that, I still do it probably like 10 times a year, where if I know it's going to be a really good hunt, I will sleep out there on opening morning or something like that. Now I'm too old. I just won't do it. But I've done it plenty of times, and just follow the rules and regulations. You can't set up your ducks on the water if it's public water before 5 a.m., stuff like that. So you can't secure your spot by doing that. So you can set up a spot lamp and point it so that boats know where you're at, so they don't get within 50 yards of you, blah, blah, blah. You're still going to run into it. But honestly, just scout and become a better caller than anyone else out there, period.
There you
because
go.
if you're
Scout,
very
become a better
good
caller.
Because if you're a better caller than most people, especially for goose hunting, the amount of fields that, some of my best friends in the hunting industry are way better than me at goose calling, and they taught me a lot about trafficking geese. And there's people on every field next to you, and we had the best calling in that area, and we killed the geese for sure. Same thing with
That's
duck
always
hunting.
fun, because then you get to look at them guys and go, ha ha.
Right. Well, there's something so cool about winning, not only with the birds, but with the pressure. It feels incredible.
Yeah. No, it definitely does. And I think just a layer onto that, like, my rule of thumb is 1 to 2 miles from civilization, right? And what I mean by that is, like, you got to be willing to go 1 to 2 miles hiking and getting off your ass and working a little bit harder and pushing in a little bit further to get away from those people. And, part of this, it all comes down to scouting and figuring out where those birds are going. And if you're willing to work a little bit harder, the reward is that much more satisfying in my book, because you're getting into those hard to reach places where no one else is really willing to go to because it's not convenient. And then, you don't have to race to be there at 3 o'clock in the morning. You can get there at 4 or 5 or 6 a.m. and still have plenty of time to hunt in the morning and still get in there and get set up. And I believe when you find those too, like the other side of it is, you don't need a boatload of decoy. You don't have to carry a boatload of decoys with you. It's not going to be necessary when you're getting into those less pressured spots where the ducks, think about that. Like, the ducks are going there for a reason, because there is no pressure. So if you're willing to do a little research and a little homework, the reward can be tremendous, and you can hit that same pond multiple times in a weekend, and more than likely you'll do pretty well. So
I got a question for you. So when you do a lot of water hunting then in Wisconsin?
I do. Yep.
Okay. So what's your normal spread looking like for water decoys?
I'll take a half a dozen, whatever I can carry. I'm not going to overdo it.
Really?
sometimes less is more. And it comes down to, like you said, if you're a good call, if you got a good call, great. You can talk to those ducks and coax them in. I learned a trick a couple of years ago from actually one of our guides that we work with. And he does a lot of times, he'll just take a Coke bottle and he'll wrap it in black tape and he'll just throw out the Coke bottle and throw out half a dozen of those or so with his spread. And that works just as well, because you're giving the duck something different to look at. And you're also got to think of like a duck when it's coming in to land on water. There's all sorts of different reflections. And so if you can create some dark contrast and some dark shadows that just looks like a duck floating on the water, which is why I was like, oh wow, yeah, the Coke bottle trick. And we kind of laugh about it now, but you know what, that stuff works. And so sometimes less is more. Now that said, it also depends on the time of year, right?
Right.
You get away with that a lot of times earlier in the season, but then as the season progresses and these birds are pressured and they're getting shot at multiple times on the way down, you got to start to increase that. But early in the season, a lot of times, again, less is more, because you're just giving the ducks something different to look at. And in doing that, you're just trying to make them feel comfortable, right? Give them something to look at that's a little different, make them feel comfortable, talk to them. And you got to pay attention to the duck, right? And how they're acting and behaving too, as you talk to them. But yeah, I don't do huge, massive spreads, because again, last thing I want to do is carry 2 or 3 dozen decoys in. And if I got to hike a mile or two, I don't want to have to carry in a boatload of decoys either and set up this massive decoy spread, because you just don't have time for that. And in my opinion, it makes the hunt more enjoyable. Some days it can be more challenging, but it's all in the experience and it's all in the fun for me. So
interesting. I'm at a minimum, man, 2 dozen. And like everyone, what I noticed because most of my hunting is on public land, which
Sure.
is interesting. You'd be surprised. But whenever I'm water hunting, it's almost always public. And you'll go out there and you'll see guys with huge diver lines, 8 dozen decoys, and 6 robo ducks, 6 spinners.
Right.
And I'm just like, I throw out 2 to 3 dozen, and 2 dozen are mallards, and then a dozen or spoonies, pintails, widgeon, gadwall, and then some goose, always 6 goose floaters, at least 4 goose floaters, just because you'll get that random goose that comes through.
Yeah.
Looking for a drink of water. And what I've found is everyone has mallard decoys. Everyone.
Yep.
No one's ever throwing anything else. So when I
Right.
started throwing out spoony decoys, they have that little bit of white on their rib. You'd be surprised. Every single duck that would land in my spread would key in on that spoonbill.
Interesting.
Every single one. And I'm guaranteeing you it's because of the white. So then I started throwing some diver decoys in my spread, just mixed in with everything, and they would land on the diver decoys. It's because of that contrast you're talking about.
Yeah, and that's really what it
Has to
comes
be.
down to. Yeah, isn't that funny how like it's just funny, you think, oh well, a mallard's going to see a mallard and know it's a mallard. They don't. They're seeing, because you got to think, I mean, they're moving, and then you mix in the water and the sun, and you all these sorts of different colors that reflect. And so by again, sometimes that's really all it is giving them something different to look at that is going to reflect a different way that just grabs their attention. That's really what it comes down to. You're just trying to grab their attention, and then you got them arranged in a way that makes them feel comfortable about coming in. And that's why I'm a believer in less is more, and different is oftentimes better. So to your point, when I look at some of the public land places, I'm looking at what the other guys are doing, and I will do the exact opposite. So if they're throwing mallards, I'm going to throw spoonies. If they're throwing, right, and I pay attention to what other guys are carrying with them for that exact reason, because again, you're giving them something different, and it's going to catch their eye a little bit different. And that's really all you're trying to do. And then let the calling do the rest, right?
So tell me what you think about this. This is a theory I've had for years. So you're trying to kill mallards. There's 1,000 mallards hitting this lake, right? And they're not working in on your decoys, and they're flaring at 45 yards as soon as they get close to the spread. Now, here's a theory that I've cooked up. A mallard knows what a mallard looks like, right? And they know if something's off. However, they are not a widgeon. They are not a pintail. They are not a gadwall. They are not a goose. And so if you have that stuff out there, and they're hearing mallard calling, because that's very common, a hen mallard, sorry. they're more apt to not know that there's something wrong if there's different species there, because they are not that species. Same thing with geese.
Yep.
I don't know. It's a theory that I've been working on for quite some time, but it's like one of my good buddies, Nick Johnson, told me a long time ago, when you're trying to hide in a field that has no hide, think of it this way. If you go out into your living room and you see a bunch of bumps underneath your carpet, you're going to go, what in the world is that?
Right.
However, if you see a shoe and a blanket laying on the ground, you're not even going to think twice about it.
Right.
So it's one of those things.
And I think that's a good theory. You should put that to test. If they're flaring at 45, I like that theory. I'm trying to think of how you could prove that theory, and how you could actually say, hey, this is what's happening. I'm trying to think outside the box here.
I think there's too many variables.
Maybe try the Coke bottle thing too, and throw that at, and I also think part of it too, like, I think of like coyote hunting, right? And if you're trying to call in a wily coyote that's old, wise, and smart, and you're sitting there on a dying rabbit call, that coyote's going to run in and he's going to hang up. He's going to hang up at probably about 100 yards, and then he's going to play the wind, and he's going to circle around and come in for a closer look, and he's going to confirm with his eyes what he's hearing. So it's that same concept. They're going to confirm with their eyes what they're hearing, and maybe they're just a little bit smarter. So test that theory. Maybe, oh man, my phone's going to blow up. Maybe just take out a bunch of mallards when you start to see that happen, and throw them out and just see, and specifically throw out some of the hens if you're using a hen to call them in, and try it and just see what happens. It's the only thing I can think. And then maybe try that Coke bottle trick too, because that's worked for me, in the last couple of years. I know it sounds weird, but again, dark contrast on the water, and it looks like a shadow of a duck, and then it just kind of brings them in, which is also very interesting. And then try mixing some in with your decoys. Bottom line, what I found in doing that is I can carry, less decoys. I can carry half a dozen or so decoys, and then I can carry a half a dozen Coke bottles, and it looks like I got a set of a dozen. You kind of fool them to a point, and then later in the season, obviously, you gotta expand your sets. But
right,
I'm a huge believer in that, giving them something a little bit different.
Well, I don't know if you've ever heard me tell this story on our podcast, but I was pretty young. I bet you I was like 23, and we had a wedding the next day, and me and my friend stayed at my brother-in-law's brother's house. And it's this lake in Minnesota that is super famous back in the 50s for shooting canvasbacks. The only problem with it is that there's no hide whatsoever. They're like pencil reeds. There's nothing else. You can't hunt from the shoreline. You can't hunt from the shoreline because it's all private ground, but the lake is private or public. And we go out there the first day and just get our asses kicked. And I mean, just every single duck did not even give us a look, from canvasbacks to bluebills, like literally every type of duck that flies in the sky didn't even look at us. And we had a beautiful spread. We had like 3 dozen mallards, 3 dozen divers of every kind, 3 sets of lines coming out with like a pool of divers, like you see them rafting out in the middle of the lake. And here I am thinking it looks so good. And then our boat trailer got messed up as we were coming back in, and we were literally stuck at the launch. Shit. We're 2.5 hours from home, and some farmer comes up right across the launch, and he goes, "You guys messed up. You want me to help you fix your trailer?" I was like, "Please, dear God." And he goes, "I don't see any dead ducks in your boat. What's going on?" And we're telling him about it, and he's like, "Well, your problem is you don't have any coot decoys." And I go, "What? What do you mean?" He goes, "Every duck, you notice all the rafts of coots. I mean, there were thousands of coots on this lake, thousands." And he goes, "You notice how every duck landed with the coots?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "I've got 4 dozen in the barn here. You take those out. Don't bring a single other duck. Don't touch your call. Nothing."
Interesting.
He goes, "You go back to the same spot you were today." And so we sat there and had a bunch of beers with the guy. I was so hungover the next day, and
those are the best.
helped us. he helped us fix our axle on the boat trailer because the launch has like a huge pothole on it, and we just literally destroyed the trailer.
Wow.
And so we fix the boat, get really drunk with this guy, take his decoys, go back out there, and we limit it out in 20 minutes.
Wow.
Canvasbacks, bluebills, mallards, and buffleheads. I mean, just an absolute shit show. It was incredible. Incredible. So the Coke bottle thing of all black decoys, no, I know it works.
Yep.
I know it does.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it too, right? Is understanding where you're hunting and then just paying attention to those little things like that and where those ducks are landing and who they're landing with. And that all comes down to preseason scouting and even during the season, just scouting in general and getting out. That is interesting though. You went out with some coots and everybody else came to you then. So again, right? Look at what everyone else is doing. Do something different. Do the opposite. Mm-hmm. And I'm a huge believer in that. I believe that, my whole life is like, I'm going to take what everyone else is doing with a grain of salt, and then I'm going to do the opposite and see what happens.
Right. I mean, unless they're just destroying ducks, the ducks, then you need to copy whatever they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. There's that side of it too. It is a double-edged sword. So what I'm saying is take all that with a grain of salt and figure out what's going to work for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's
for sure.
Awesome, man. Hey, listen, I want to be respectful of your time. I also want to be respectful of our listeners' time. It's been a blast hanging out with you, Joey, and definitely want to have you on a future episode and continue the conversation, because I think we could rap about this all day, especially, the two of us. We kind of hunt similar areas, a little bit different strategies, but would love to have you on another show and we'll.
Yeah, dude, I'll have to have you on our podcast. It's Midwest Flyways Uncensored, or I think we just changed it to the Midwest Flyways podcast, but it's a very uncensored podcast. There's some bad things that are said on there. So if you're underage, probably shouldn't listen to it, but we have a really good time. And if you're in Wisconsin, you're probably not that far away. You'll just have to come to the studio here.
Yeah, and we'll have to come up for sure.
It's a whole production. The whole thing is filmed and the quality is really good. So you'll have to come on our podcast, man.
Yeah,
so thanks so much for having me on.
It'd be a blast. It'd be a hoot. It's always great to connect with guys that are fairly local too, just because, again, we understand. I think people in Wisconsin, Minnesota, just right here in the upper, even into Michigan, you can talk with some of those guys, and we all got kind of some of the same issues between public and private land, and really anywhere across the Midwest anymore. But us guys from the north, we got a little bit different accent, and we got a little bit different take on life. So
shit, but I'm telling you, if you're from the Great White North, you just hop in the boat, throw some decoys out, put your toque on, you'll shoot some birds, eh? You know?
Hey, I'll be damned, we sure will.
Well, thanks so much for having me on, but I had a blast.
Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate it. And thanks again to our listeners. We appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll see you guys all on another episode of Knee Deep in the Duck Blind. So this is Eric and Joey signing off. Everybody have a great day. We'll talk to y'all real soon.
We are Duck Hunting Fanatics. Knee deep in the duck blind. If it flies, it dies.